Thank you for joining us today for this festive edition of our Pensions in a Pod series. I'm delighted to be joined today by a number of our colleagues. So Charlotte Cartwright and Emma King, we're going to talk about DB pensions, Ros Wood on pensions de-risking, Michael Jones on DC pensions, Gary Delderfield on public sector pensions, Simon Daniel on pensions investments, and last but not least, Jen Green on regulated products. Now, it wouldn't be Christmas without a Christmas cracker, and by lucky coincidence, I have 6 crackers in front of me. Each contains a question from one of our pension specialists, and if we're lucky, we may even find a few festive dad jokes. So, if I can ask one of you to help me pull a cracker, please. I've got a first joke. You're going to love this one. What type of pension does Santa provide for his staff? An elf-invested personal pension plan. Love it. Okay, so first question. So first question from one of our DB specialists. So Charlotte or Emma, over to you. According to PwC's buyout index, what was the total buyout surplus in the UK's 5,000 corporate DB schemes in October 2024?
Well, that's a very good question, Jeremy. I know it's a really big number. I'm going to go with 330 billion. And actually, that leads me on to talk about what the biggest thing I think has been in the UK DB pension space during 2024, which is the return of the surplus. Loads of DB pension schemes have experienced an improvement in their funding position over the year, and that's led to increased focus on surplus management, how you spend it if you've got one, or how you avoid it arising in the first place if you think it might be trapped. And the previous government, of course, relaxed tax due on surplus repayments to a sponsor, reducing it from 35% to 25%. So some may find that helpful. Another thing that's actually been a very hot topic in the DB pension space this year has been the Virgin Media case, only relevant to those formally contracted out schemes. But in summary, in the summer, the Court of Appeal held that in order for historical amendments to relevant benefits to be valid, a contemporaneous actuarial confirmation was required. Now, whether this needs trustees or sponsors to now review historical amendments to check the position will have to be determined on a case-by-case basis. It's certainly given rise to some challenges for a lot of schemes. And there are further developments on this expected in 2025, with an additional court case coming to the court in early 2025. And of course, the industry continues to lobby the government to step in and provide some support. And finally, I should give a passing mention to the General Code of Practice, which came into force in March of this year, and it requires schemes to review their existing policies to make sure they remain compliant with the new provisions, and also to create new policies where there weren't any before. And that needs to be complete so that you can conduct your first own risk assessment. And that is something that's likely to continue through to 2025. But talking about 2025, Charlotte, what else is on the agenda?
Yeah, do you know what? It's interesting. There's some big related watch this space items for 25, which actually, depending on how they develop, could really contribute to reshaping the DB pensions landscape, including whether the government's going to take forward any of its proposals about employer access to DB scheme surplus that you were talking about, and how that feeds into the broader government aim to increase pensions investment in the UK economy, which is interestingly potentially unintended links to schemes starting to work their way through their first valuations under the new funding code regime, meaning they'll be setting, if they haven't already, their long-term objective and revisiting how their scheme sets its funding basis. Not to mention the broader changes, like the legislation we're expecting in 25 to set that long-awaited statutory framework for DB consolidators. And we'll also be taking our next step on the journey to improving member engagement with those first schemes connecting to the dashboard ecosystem in April. And whilst we're still a long way off the public accessing dashboards, there'll undoubtedly be a spotlight on how that rollout goes.
Spot on, really interesting. Thank you, Emma and Charlotte. Can I ask one of you to help me, please, with pulling the next cracker? I've got a question in this one. Okay, this one's for Ros, I think. So how many insurers are now active in the UK pensions buyout market?
So we've got 10 insurers actively quoting on transactions in the UK market at the moment. And this is the greatest number since 2007 and is also potentially increasing to a record 11 insurers in 2025, which is great news for schemes. For some time, there have been some concerns around capacity in the insurance market, but increased number of providers who are competing on price, on contractual terms, and on member experience will really help the market respond to that demand from schemes. Looking forward to 2025, we expect to see an evolution of the run-on versus buyout debate that's really dominated discussion this year. For some schemes, that will be a genuine either-or decision, but in many cases, we expect the decision-making will be a bit more fluid, with trustees considering run-on for a while within a framework that enables a switch to a risk settlement endgame in certain circumstances or after a particular period of time. Understanding the why of run-on is going to be particularly important and will also influence what happens in the interim. For schemes with a medium to long-term run-on strategy, a longevity swap might be the way forward. For schemes still looking to bridge a funding deficit to buy out, a capital-backed journey plan may offer a faster route through to insurance, or a consolidator option may be on the cards. And for sponsors interested in realising an upside from their pension scheme, M&G's value share product offers a structure that allows sponsors to share in the risks and rewards that are otherwise passed through to the insurer. In short, the risk transfer market offers options to suit schemes of all shapes and sizes and with a range of endgame strategies. So 2025 is going to be a really exciting year.
Thanks, Ros. That's fascinating. Growing all the time, isn't it? Okay, so the third cracker to be pulled. This is a question for our head of DC, Michael Jones. Michael, according to the government's latest DC consultation, what value of assets will a DC scheme have to have in its default fund to be a DC mega fund?
Thanks, Jeremy. So really good question. And the current government has really set out their mantra for scale consolidation and investment in UK businesses in the Mansion House proposals that came out a month or so ago. And we see this ramped up consolidation and scale as a major feature, not only of 2024, but 2025 and looking ahead to 2030. And the rationale for setting minimum thresholds for DC commercial arrangements is to reduce fragmentation in the market and the government's idea that more scale means wider opportunity to invest in more diversified asset classes, specifically UK businesses. Now, whether scale and consolidation achieves the government's ambitions for UK growth, it is really a moot point. But back to the question of where this threshold sits, well, effectively, the government said they want fewer, bigger DC mega funds of between 25 and 50 billion. Now, we don't know, and part of the unanswered questions in the consultation was where this threshold will sit. Will it sit at provider level, so the umbrella level per provider, scheme level, or fund level? And I think that's a really important point of detail that we expect to be responding to in consultation and will really set the direction of travel for the DC market going forward. Fortunately, we've received confirmation from HM Treasury and DWP that the threshold will not apply to single connected multi-employer schemes. And I think that's really important for all those employer-run schemes out there that may be thinking, oh my goodness, what do I need to do with my scheme? This is for commercial schemes only, this threshold and the potential for a maximum number of defaults. So what do the Mansion House proposals mean in terms of the DC market in general, particularly with the announcements in the budget that preceded them? Well, we've got the scaling and consolidation agenda, but we've also got a really noticeable shift in DC back to DC pension and DC moving from being a retirement savings vehicle and something that people would leave to beneficiaries and second lives back towards DC pension being used for a single life retirement income. And I think that's a really important point of detail that we'll see come in with the guided retirement changes in the pension schemes bill next year, value for money and the general direction of travel under the new government. So 2025 promises to be a significant year of change and evolution for DC, not quite revolution, but very close. We're going to see guided retirement, value for money, small pots consolidation, dashboards, advice, guidance, boundary changes, all under the umbrella of scale consolidation, bigger and fewer. So the race to scale by 2030 is well and truly on, and 2025 will be the launch pad for this revised agenda.
That's plenty big, Michael. The market's growing and growing. So let's pull the next cracker. Oh, we've got a joke. I love a joke. Okay, so why would Santa's wife make a terrible lawyer? Because she misses clauses. That's great, isn't it? Okay, so there's a question on the LGPS, which must be for our head of public sector pensions, Gary Delderfield. Gary, based on the government's proposals, when will LGPS funds be expected to have transferred all of their assets across to one or more of the 8 LGPS pools?
Well, thanks, Jeremy, and firstly, very Merry Christmas to you. So your question comes from the Mansion House speech delivered by Rachel Reeves in November, and the new consultation paper Fit for the Future that was issued on the same day. So the answer to your question is March 2026 is the date by which government is expecting the LGPS funds to have transferred all of their assets into their respective investment pools, which is quite a challenging timescale considering how much there is still left to transfer across. Obviously, some of the funds have already transitioned to lots of assets, but there's still a lot of assets still to held in the individual funds that need to be transferred across. So that's one aspect of the consultation. There is also proposals dealing with increased levels of local investment by LGPS funds and some fairly significant changes to the way that the LGPS funds are run and governed. So an awful lot in that consultation paper to be thinking about. In terms of next year, it's going to be a very busy year, I think. So firstly, the consultation closes on the 16th of January, so not very long for clients to get and ourselves to get submissions into government on that consultation paper. 1st of March is the deadline by which the pools have got to submit their proposals on how they're going to deliver all of these changes. The pension schemes bill is also going to start its journey in spring, and that's going to contain some of the primary legislation needed to deliver these changes. And on top of that, 2025 is going to be a very busy year generally because we've got the triennial valuations of the fund, we've got McLeod, we've got dashboards, and lots of other things that the funds are going to have to deal with as business as usual on top of this consultation. So yes, 2025, I think, is going to be a very busy year for all of us.
That's really interesting, Gary. Thank you. Okay, so we've just got 2 crackers left. Let's see who's next. Oh, I've got a next question. Okay, so according to the government's interim report on its pensions investment review, how much more do Australian DC funds allocate to domestic investments across all asset classes than their UK counterparts? That's definitely one for our pensions investment specialist, Simon.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yes, the interim report that was published at Mansion House said that the DWP had found through its analysis that there is a 30 percentage point gap in the amount of home investment across asset classes in UK DC funds compared to Australia. And of course, this finding is part of what's driven the government's consultation in relation to the DC market and the consultation in relation to the LGPS, both of which were launched at Mansion House. And we know that in time this will be relevant for DB schemes in the private sector too, because we know the government would love DB schemes to invest more in UK productive assets to drive UK economic growth. But DB schemes already support the gilt market and already therefore do support the UK economy in that very substantial way, and the government is keen not to lose that as schemes move along their journey plan and gradually buy in and buy out and wind up. But if schemes are going to invest more in UK productive assets, then they need something from the government, which is effectively an environment for scheme run-on, under which most schemes will probably buy out in the end, but do so later than they might otherwise have done. And really what will allow schemes to make that decision is a regime which is more permissive in relation to the release of surplus from ongoing schemes, whether to sponsors or members or both. And the fundamental key to unlock all of that is a response from this government to the previous government's consultation on options for DB schemes. So that will be a headline feature of 2025 once we get into the new year. So too will the government's thoughts around how DB schemes can access UK productive finance investment. There are some really interesting ideas coming forward from industry in relation to the potential use of National Wealth Fund for that purpose. And now we have the new funding and investment regime with the funding code being enforced. Schemes will be constructing their investment strategies to ensure that they're fully funded on a low dependency basis at the time they reach significant maturity. So there's an awful lot for DB schemes to be thinking about, one step behind DC and LGPS, but all of this will come very quickly for them as we go into the new year.
Thanks, Simon. So let's see what's in the final cracker. This is my colleague Jen Green, member of our regulated products team. Jen, in the government's opinion, what level of assets under management do group personal pensions need to achieve in order to realise the true benefits of scale?
Thanks, Jeremy. That's a good question. And the government has recently suggested that schemes need to have over 50 billion of assets under management in order to realise the true benefits of scale. And that's both from an investment capability perspective and also in terms of economic growth. But the workplace pension products market is really fragmented, and there are currently only a handful of GPPs that have reached this level of scale, so that have reached the 50 billion mark. But the government's determined to increase this, and the government's drive to improve the performance of contract-based schemes and move towards a more consolidated DC pensions market has been the gift that keeps on giving in 2024. We've had the FCA's consultation on the new value for money framework and a recent flurry of Mansion House consultations that Michael has already mentioned. But 2024 hasn't just been about the workplace schemes. 2024 was also an interesting year for pension products on the retail side of the market. We saw the first anniversary of the Consumer Duty coming into force, and self-invested personal pensions continue to be a key focus and a priority for the FCA. The most recent DSCEO letter from the FCA was a really clear call to arms for pension providers to be more proactive in resolving member complaints and identifying weaknesses in their systems and controls. As the number of pension complaints to FOS continue to rise, the FCA's focus on pensions is not something we're expecting to go away. But let's end on a positive. What are we expecting in 2025? The first thing to look out for will be the FCA's response to the advice guidance boundary review. The FCA has said that its focus will be on allowing pension providers to support savers in a new way, so through a new version of targeted support. But the star on the tree next year for regulated pensions is likely to be the new power that will allow contract-based schemes to transfer members to different arrangements without their consent. It's been a long time coming, and the fact that it is now officially on the way will be welcome news for all this Christmas.
Thanks, Jen. Spot on. And look, what our final joke. Why doesn't Santa have a retirement plan? Because he's too focused on the present. Okay, so thank you all for joining us today. During our festive editions, we love to showcase a wide array of talent from our team, and playing us out, we have trainee solicitor Simon Grant on the piano. We hope you all have a wonderful Christmas and New Year. We look forward to welcoming you back for our New Year edition of Pensions in a Pod. I've been Jeremy Goodwin with Charlotte Cartwright and Emma King, Ros Wood, Michael Jones, Gary Delderfield, Simon Daniel and Jen Green. Merry Christmas, everyone.